It's great to be here. I want to thank the Buck Institute for inviting me, and despite how hard it was to get here, traveling from the East Coast yesterday, I'm excited to be here with all of you. I'm glad he mentioned my eldest son, because he would be really happy about that. He's working on his doctorate right now at UCLA, and he often feels as though someone who has a strong commitment and interest in practice is not valued in the academy. I'll let him know, well, he's valued here. But I actually have 5 kids. Right? They go from age 36, Joaquin is 36, to Ava, who's 7. So it's quite a span. And I often tell people, if you have more than one child, then you're practicing equity at home. That's why I'm an expert at equity. Anybody with more than one child knows they're all different. Sometimes you have to prioritize the needs of one over the other. Doesn't mean you love them more, although some people have favorites. I don't have favorites. But it just makes sense. But as a parent, you're always focused on the outcomes. And the outcomes that matter are not simply how well they do in school. Because if they do well in school, but they're strung out on drugs, we still have a problem, don't we? All right. Or if they get great scores, but are miserable, unhappy people, that's not too good either. So we always have to think in a more holistic manner about our kids and that of our own, and I think the kids that we serve in our schools. Now, a lot of this I got early on, but I got it kind of intuitively. It just made sense to me. How many of you are first-generation college students, or were? Okay, I come from a family. Let's give a hand to all us first-gen. Me too. Neither of my parents graduated from college. Neither of them graduated from high school. But they managed to send all 6 of us to college. Harvard, Brown, Cornell, Berkeley. Big G, coming from Brooklyn, New York, Brownsville, where I grew up. That's the part of Brooklyn that still hasn't gentrified. Well, when I got to college, I was awfully intimidated because I didn't feel prepared. And I realized I was surrounded by some of the wealthiest people in the world. One of the people in my class was John F. Kennedy Jr. Right? So I said, well, I'm in over my head here. But I had a great desire to do something practical. That is, to use my education way to make a difference for others. So at first I thought, well, I'll be pre-med. The doctors are helpful. And then I remembered, you know what, I hate chemistry. So that organic chemistry was really a reminder of how much I hated it. I said, well, there must be other ways to help people. And I took a psych course and got hooked into schools, working with kids. And so during my senior year, I did my student teaching in Providence at Central High School, which at the time I was told was the worst high school in the city. But because I was young and enthusiastic, I said, let me at it. I'm ready. So I was asked to teach American history. And my mentor teacher tells me American history is very simple. You start at the Revolutionary War in September, and you get to the Vietnam War in June. That's all as far as you go. I said, okay. He says, here's the book. I'll be in the back watching. I said, well, what about the Constitution? He said, don't get caught up in the Constitution. Constitution's too complicated. You got to be at the Civil War by Christmas. I said, well, Civil War is really complicated. He said, no, you don't get it. You got to be at Great Depression by Easter. And then I got it. He didn't care if the kids actually learned history. All he cared about is if I covered the material. Well, fortunately for me, he wasn't going to be in the back watching. He was going to be off drinking coffee, which meant that although I was only 21, when the door closed, I had the power. And because I had a love of teaching, I said, I know what to do with this power, because I loved history. So I said, I got to find a way to make them love history too. I have to make it come to life. And so I did what came natural to me. I used Socratic seminar techniques because I knew that problem-posing education would invite them into the conversation. And then I got an idea. I said, I'm going to get friends of mine from college to come dressed up as characters from history so my students could interrogate them. But before they came in, I'd prepare them. I said, we're going to have Thomas Jefferson tomorrow, and we need to learn about all the things Jefferson did and some of the issues we need to pursue a little further. So when my good friend came dressed as Jefferson, they wanted to know about Sally Hemings. And how old was she when you started having children with her? So to me, the idea that we're going to use education to get children, our students, excited about learning is what education should be about. But as many of us know, that's not what it's been about over the last several years. We've been fixated on how to raise test scores, raise achievement, and those are not unimportant outcomes, but we forgot all about how to get there. How do you get kids motivated? How do you get them excited so they want to learn? I try to remind people, the achievement data, the achievement indicators, whether we're talking about test scores or graduation rates or grades, those are the outcomes. Now the question is, how do we move them? How do we get them there? If you wanted to lose weight, would you focus on getting a good scale and weighing yourself as often as you could? Well, that's what we've been doing in education, right? We focus on the scale, but we forget that, no, we've got to figure out how to get there. The equivalent to the diet and the exercise is the engagement. How do we get kids engaged? And that is fundamentally an equity issue. It's an equity issue because in a lot of schools, the only kids who get to do the fun, exciting things are the kids we think are college material, our best students. And the ones we think are not really that smart or not that capable, we're going to give them direct instruction. We're going to talk at them as if that were an effective strategy. I would say the big problem in a lot of our schools is that we don't teach kids the way they learn. We expect them to learn the way we teach. And when they can't do it, then we blame them. We say something is wrong with them or their parents. If we just spend a little time thinking about how kids learn things, we would realize that project-based learning should have been at the core of what we've been doing for so long. How does a child learn to play a new video game? By playing. They don't download the lecture first, right? No. They get on there and play. In fact, some kids will cheat. They will go to YouTube to figure out, okay, how do you play this game? But it's not really cheating, is it? That's called modeling. Right? And of course, when they're learning, they make mistakes, because mistakes are part of learning. But they stick with it. And over time, they get better and better, so they get to experience mastery. Ask yourself now, how often do our kids get to learn through their mistakes instead of having mistakes used against them? How often do our students get to experience genuine mastery in something, so they're ready for something more complex? There is a reason why we have so many kids entering high school still functioning at an elementary level. Because the learning they've done has been an inch deep. So equity has got to be at the center of our work. And we know that because our society is becoming more and more unequal. Those of you who live in the Bay Area know how the pressures related to housing and the rise in homelessness are impacting our quality of life. That's not simply a Bay Area problem, it's an American problem. Sadly, we think that schools alone can solve that problem. We have a lot of evidence schools alone will not solve that problem. But schools can do more than they've done, because right now, what the evidence shows is that in a lot of our schools, the strongest predictor of how well our students will do is how much money the family earns. And if you combine how much money they earn with their race and the education level of the parents, particularly the mother, because the mother's usually the first teacher, you can predict with great consistency how well our students will do. Well, that should disturb all of us. Because many of us know there are talented kids out there who come from trailer parks and housing projects and Indian reservations, whose parents don't speak English. But in a lot of our schools, that's not the kids we see excelling. So we need to make equity central, which means that we have to recognize the academic and social needs of a child are connected. That sounds so obvious, right? That hungry kids don't do well in school. So if they come hungry, we got to find a way to feed them. And some of those kids who have trouble reading might need eyeglasses. Well, our policies haven't addressed those social needs. Now, those of you from California, I want to acknowledge California has taken a step. We now have an equity-based funding formula, which for the first time is beginning to give us more resources to address higher need students. But we're still, 43rd in the nation in per pupil spending? So we got a long way to go to get to where we should be. But even as we climb out of this hole, we still have to do this equity work. Because the alternative to that is to continue to produce the same results. And those results are killing confidence in public education. Our parents expect more. Our parents expect their kids to have a chance because for many of them, education is the only chance. And so as we start to think about equity in our work, I want you to think about how you approach your students, how you approach that opportunity to learn. You know, many people don't even recognize that homework is an equity issue. Now, how many of you help your own kids with homework? Even when you're tired, even when you don't fully understand it. And how many of you know very well you have students out there that have no one to help them, may have no place to even get it done, but they're being judged by circumstances they don't control. Once we take equity seriously, we start to realize we're going to have to do things differently. Otherwise, we're going to continue to lose kids. So many people have seen this chart and they get it. Okay, we've got to make the standards accessible because they're not all the same. Although I point out to so many people, there are so many ways we continue to treat them all the same. How many of you have students right now whose job it is every morning to get their little brothers and sisters to school before they go? That means they're often late, not because they're irresponsible, but because they're responsible for their siblings. I was explaining this when I was in Bakersfield recently, and superintendent raised his hand and he said, I just had a revelation. Our high school is across the street from our elementary school, but our high school starts at 7:30, the elementary school starts at 8. And we literally see kids running across the street to get to school on time after they drop off their brothers and sisters. And we finally realized maybe we need to stop offering core courses first period. What an accommodation. Instead of setting people up to fail. Some people are set up to succeed, aren't they? They start out way ahead of others. There's a reason why, certain kids are on the pathway to the Ivy League. In New York City, they actually have preschools they call baby Ivies. Right? People line up as soon as they think they're pregnant to get their kid's name on a list, to get them into the baby Ivy that they think will lead to one of the best colleges in the country. I have a daughter like that. My 5th child is privileged, and it shows. She could explain global warming. If she were here, she would want to. She would want to be up on stage with me. She knows all the words to the Hamilton songs by heart. She's reading Harry Potter. She's up to book 6 now. And other parents will frequently say, your daughter's gifted. And what parent doesn't want to hear that? Don't we love to hear that about our kids? And then I have to remind my wife, you know what her gift is? She has 2 parents with PhDs. That's the gift. That's the gift. So how do we create the opportunities for the kids who don't have that, who don't have all that support at home, who come to us needing more? We cannot afford to be schools that are only good at serving kids that don't need much help. If I told you it was a great doctor, but don't go if you're really sick. He's only good when you're healthy. This doctor's really good with healthy people. Well, I know a lot of teachers out there that say, I'm really good with the highly motivated kids, with the high achievers. That's who I want to teach. I've been doing this so long, I only want to teach those kids. Don't give me the strugglers. Because sometimes I have to actually work harder. And so equity work is about eliminating the barriers to learning. And I want you to think about what some of those barriers are. Think about this. How many of you had a teacher at some point in your career that got you to like something? That got you to be good at something that you once thought you were no good at? Anybody? Okay, lots of you. That's good. Think about that teacher, what that teacher did for you. I had a teacher like that in 8th grade, Mrs. Harris. Algebra. Now, I didn't like math that much as it was, but when they brought X and Y into it, I said, okay, forget it. I thought this was math. Where are the numbers? And Ms. Harris, first day of class, said, how many of you struggle in math? So reluctantly, I raised my hand, and she said, okay, all the kids who struggle, you're going to sit up front, because I'm going to be checking on you. Because she understood if you didn't get it in September, you certainly weren't going to have it by June. So she was an evidence-based teacher, not a faith-based teacher. She wanted to see the evidence that you're actually learning. And she would check, and she'd say, ask me questions. If I say something or explain something you don't understand, you let me know. Stop me. And Ms. Harris wore a lot of perfume. So if you weren't paying attention, you know what happened? You smelled just like Ms. Harris after a while. So you better be on it. She understood that the goal of teaching was actually to teach the kids. She said, I'm the best teacher in the school, because she actually knew how to teach people. So I want you to think about, what are some of the barriers that get in the way? Are the backgrounds of your students determining the outcomes? Have we provided the opportunity to learn for all of our students? Knowing full well that some of our kids are going to need more support, more time, stronger relationships, because our students learn through relationships. How many of you have seen kids that work for one teacher, same student won't work for another teacher? You know the hardest thing to teach a teacher? It's our job to build a relationship, because we're the professionals, we're the adults. So lots of us like to take great pride of our students, the ones who go on to the top universities, who go on to do great things. Are we also willing to take responsibility for the ones who don't? The ones who end up low-wage jobs, who end up not fulfilling their potential, because they're our students too. You know, most of us don't go into this field for the money, do we? If you do by now, you are really bitter, right? We go into this field to make a difference, and so the question we have to keep asking ourselves is, are we? Are we making a difference? For whom are we making a difference? And that's why it's so important to be also clear that equity is not about lowering the standards. Because if we lower the standards, then we set kids up. They used to have this inflated sense of their ability, then they get to college or they get to high school and they realize, oh, an A at my old school was nothing like what's required here. It's also not about just slogans. You know, we've lived through so many clever slogans, haven't we? No child left behind, that was a good one. Except we left so many kids behind. And I try to remind people, when Marion Wright Edelman came up with the slogan, leave no child behind, she didn't mean to test the kids as frequently as possible. Right? She was thinking about health and nutrition and all the things kids need. And equity is not only an issue for schools serving low-income kids of color. I go to lots of schools that serve affluent kids where I see equity issues all the time. Amongst the kids with special needs, amongst the kids who just don't get it, because being affluent is no guarantee that you'll get it. Amongst the kids who come who are stressed out and depressed, or who don't get attention from their parents, equity issues show up everywhere. And so it also can't be about choosing which kids to serve. Are we going to serve the high achievers or the low achievers? This is what makes it hard. We got to serve them all. We got to serve them all. And I realize as an educator myself how hard that is, because they come to us with different needs, with different degree of motivation. So it's not easy, but that's the work. So how do we make sure we do it in a way that can actually result in making a difference? So for a while now, I and several others have been pushing this idea of deeper learning. That deeper learning is the way to equity. Deeper learning is actually not a new idea either, right? It's just about utilizing your higher order thinking skills. Things like the ability to analyze information, to evaluate, to apply, and hopefully to demonstrate some creativity. To undertake and learn through complex tasks and challenging text. To acquire the skills you're going to need for college and careers. To think critically. Deeper learning is what prepares you for citizenship. How can you vote intelligently if you can't engage in thinking critically about the issues? How can you distinguish between fake news and real news unless you have been prepared to ask questions? And so deeper learning has got to be at the center of our equity work, which means we've got to recognize that this can't be limited just to the kids we think are high achievers. What's the most common question you've ever heard from any 3-year-old? Why? Why is a higher order question. Why do I have to take a bath? They're serious, aren't they? What will happen if I don't take a bath? We have to discuss sanitation now. Why do I have to eat vegetables? We have to talk about nutrition. And why is the sky blue? Now we need help. Because that's a tough one, isn't it? But our kids are naturally curious, and what it turns out is that curiosity can be a driver of achievement. So when we get our kids to utilize those higher order thinking skills that go beyond memorization, so they can apply what they've learned, one of the things we know is learning becomes more powerful. I saw this in the Bronx. On one of the coldest days of the year, visiting a high school in the South Bronx, and minus 10 degrees outside, and I see kids bundling up at 10 a.m. I said, where are you guys going? It's freezing out. They said, I know, but we have to collect samples from the Bronx River. From the Bronx River, now anybody from New York knows you don't touch the Bronx River because it's polluted, and you certainly don't touch it in January. I said, why? They said, because we're monitoring what pollutants are in the river. And we're monitoring the plant life and the animal life. And 2 kids excitedly told me they'd spotted beavers now in the Bronx River. 2 gay beavers living together in the Bronx River, and they wanted to tell me all about it. So I asked the science teacher, why are the kids studying the Bronx River in their chemistry class? She said, because I want them to be scientists. And I want them to see how science is applied in their world and how it can be used to make a difference in their lives. I said, oh. I said, you have higher goals, don't you? She said, much higher. She wasn't just focused on the test. This is a teacher who knew that focusing on lecture, least effective teaching strategy. My friend Roland Tharp called this the cemetery method of instruction. Line them up in rows, keep them as still as possible. Deadly for a lot of kids, isn't it? It's one of the reasons why so many kids say school is boring. Here's what we know. When you start teaching through discussion, when you start teaching through practice, through demonstrations, it takes more planning, doesn't it? It's harder. The reason why many people just focus on direct instruction. It's all they can do. But it's not all the kids can do. So we have good research now that curiosity can be a driver of achievement. Because when kids are curious, and I remind you, they're naturally curious, they start to take ownership. They start to seek it out. Dr. Shah says high levels of curiosity can close the achievement gap. Do you believe it? How often do your students come to you at the end of the day and say, wow, that was a hell of a lesson. Thank you very much. Can't wait to come back. I need some more of that. That should happen sometimes, shouldn't it? Good teaching is like good cooking. How do you know someone's a good cook? They tell you, that was good. I want some more. Let me know when you're cooking again. Think about the teachers that had an impact on you. What did they do? How come you still remember? Some of you can still even remember some of the lessons they taught. Curiosity reminds us that our work as educators has to also be creative, because teaching is both art and skill. And over again, I see teachers who have figured this out, but too often they're working in isolation. I was in Baltimore visiting a first grade classroom, and the teacher brings out a hermit crab. She's got everybody's attention. And the kids are gathered around. They'd never seen one before. So she said, what are your questions? They've got lots of questions. Where are the eyes? Can you tell if it's a boy or a girl? How? What do they eat? Where do they live? And after answering their questions, she said, okay, I want you to write a story about the crab, draw a picture of the crab. And for the next hour and a half, these kids were totally engaged, kept coming up to look. And I asked her, why did you bring in the crab? She said, because it's not good enough to just show a picture. When you bring the real thing, it just captures their imagination. Capturing their imagination is what education should be about. Unleashing the imagination. And project-based learning can do that for us. The alternative is what we see happening in so many schools. Kids who get turned off early because they can't read, therefore they don't like reading. Guess what? You don't like reading, it's pretty much all over, isn't it? The next thing you know, those kids aren't in school, and next thing you know, they become structurally disenfranchised. We have over 5 million adults between the ages of 18 and 25 in this country who are neither working nor in school. LA alone has 250,000 of them. That's a lot of wasted talent, isn't it? We have a chance to prevent that. And we can prevent that by being clear about what it takes to promote that deeper learning. So take a look at this image. This is a 90-minute algebra class in East LA, Hollenbeck Middle School. Anybody here from LA? Couple, okay, East LA, East Side. And the teacher's so good, she can stand in the back and talk to me. If she wanted to, she could stop and do yoga. Because the kids are in control of learning. And because they're learning like this, they're not just learning math, are they? They're learning how to work together. They're learning how to listen. They're learning how to defer gratification, how to deal with conflict because conflict comes up. This teacher teaches this way because she needs to see them learning. She needs to make the learning visible so she can see who's getting it, who's not. This is the only way she can differentiate support. In fact, she can get some kids to help other kids, to make her job easier. This is also the highest form of classroom management, isn't it? It's not about behavior modification, it's about academic engagement. And I was so pressed to see that not only were the kids working together, standing up on their feet, because I taught middle school. How many of you taught middle school? Right? One of the first things you learn when you teach middle school is you got to make learning fun, right? You don't make it fun, they'll make it fun at your expense. She found a way to make math fun. These kids were planning they were ordering materials for a floor plan, for a house. They were applying what they learned in algebra to something literally concrete. They had to figure out how much concrete, too. Many of them come from families where their parents do construction. So it wasn't unfamiliar. This was culturally relevant. And when the bell rang, they were disturbed. They weren't packing up 5 minutes early. For 90 minutes. Now, of course, she doesn't start the year doing this because she has to get them ready. She has to figure out who can work with who and who should never work together. And she starts out maybe 10 minutes because she has to establish norms about how we're going to work together so kids can, in fact, listen and respect each other. You know, isn't it a great thing when people learn how to work with people they don't like? How many of you know adults that never learned that one, right? So all that's happening in a math class because that teacher understands that kids can do it. The fact that they are English learners, the fact that many of them are undocumented, they're all poor, that's not an obstacle for them to engaging in deeper learning, and she knows they need it because algebra is the gateway to college. Who gets algebra when will determine who goes to college. That's what the data shows. So how do we make sure that high standards and challenging learning opportunities are available to all of our kids? That's the work. That's what you signed up for. And that's what I hope is happening in these workshops today, because I don't think we provide enough guidance to educators on how to do it. Some people figure it out on their own, but sadly, right next door is someone else who hasn't. And the biggest obstacle right now to improving teaching in our schools is the isolation of our teachers. We have too many schools where we'll have someone who is really excellent and effective right next door to someone who is not. And we don't know how to enable the one who is still learning to learn from the one who's figured it out. One of the things they got to figure out is, how do we include the social and emotional learning, which is essential in a math class, like essential in project-based learning, because if you don't know how to do these things like impulse control and defer gratification and develop positive relationships with other people, then you can't do group work. So even in a math or science class, you got to do this kind of work. You've got to have some social and emotional intelligence, because that's integral to learning. And we're finally realizing it can't be an add-on. It's certainly not something we want to test for, but it's still got to be embedded. Embedded in everything we do, because we know that when we build a sense of community in our classrooms, when the relationships are positive and respectful, people can learn. You can't learn in an unsafe environment, can you? A place where you're afraid of making mistakes. And so, as we think about how to make project-based learning more central to our work, and we have the opportunity now, because many districts are realizing what they've been doing hasn't been working, so they're open. Now we also have to realize there can be a lot of teachers who need support in doing this work. Otherwise, they'll go back to the traditional ways. They'll go back to the traditional ways not because they work, but because it's all they know. And people will stick with what they know even when it doesn't work, won't they? Because it's what they know. And so we have to give people the opportunity to explore. How many of you know teenagers that like to argue? Anybody know any teenagers that like that? I know a few. Those are all future debaters. Could be. But debate requires they do the research, because it's not just opinions. You actually have to know what you're talking about. So you have to be able to demonstrate critical thinking, and you have to communicate your ideas, and you have to listen so you can rebut. And I'm seeing schools now that have incorporated debate in science class and in literature. Debate doesn't have to just be a special, isolated class. It can be a way we bring material together. I was at Social Justice Humanitas High School. 100% Latino, 100% low income in Pacoima, northern LA, and saw a debate about eugenics. And students were debating whether or not it was okay to sterilize women who had Down syndrome. The ethics of that, because that happened in this country. And they were passionately debating it, so passionately that after the debate, they continued to do more research. They wanted to know more, why it happened, how it happened, who allowed it to happen. When kids get a good education, they want more education. And that's what we're ultimately after, isn't it? Not kids who are simply satisfied with their grades or their test scores, but who want to continue to learn. And so that's why project-based learning is so important and essential as a driver for learning, because our students have to take ownership. And when we provide that opportunity to learn, what we start to see is kids, even kids who seemed like they were uninterested and bored, begin to demonstrate that spark. But for that to happen, we've got to have teachers with strong knowledge of content, because they have to understand what are the skills kids are supposed to acquire in this work. It can't just be a game, although games can be part of it, as long as we're clear about what they're learning in that game. We have to have a variety of skills to reach a variety of learners, because one activity might work for some kids, but not for other kids who just don't get it, aren't interested. And by now, we've all learned that talking louder is not an effective intervention. And we've got to have creativity and patience and an ongoing ability to diagnose learning needs, to figure out why they don't get it, what's getting in the way. So many kids who struggle with math are also struggling with literacy. They can't access the word problems. And then finally, we need cultural competence. So we can work with all kinds of kids, not just those who are from backgrounds like our own. Which means that we have to have empathy. Keeping in mind that empathy is not pity. Empathy is simply saying, I understand your challenges, but I know you can do it. Because when we can work across the divisions of race and class and language and age, our students start to see us as a resource and as someone they can actually learn from. And so I want to acknowledge that this is hard because we haven't given teachers clear guidance on how to do it, how to get kids more engaged. And engagement, as we know, is actually complex because it's not just about what you see. The behavioral engagement is important. Are they on task? Are they prepared? Are they doing their work? But you can be fooled sometimes, can't you? They seem to be on task, but we haven't checked for the cognitive engagement. Do they actually understand what they're doing? Can they make connections between what they're doing now and what's coming next, or what happened before? What does their work tell us about the degree and depth of understanding? Because their work, the work they produce, is a reflection on our teaching. And engagement is emotional, it's affective. It means that when we tap into that desire to learn, when our kids actually expel and demonstrate effort, they're going to produce better work. Right now, I meet so many kids that just aren't working that hard. You know why? We haven't asked them to. We haven't created an environment where they would want to. Part of the achievement gap is a gap between their actual ability and their performance. How do we close that gap? How do we make kids care about what they're doing, not settle? Well, one of the things we have to start doing then is focusing on the evidence that our students are actually learning. As I said already, my mentor teacher led me to believe that all I had to do was cover the material. He confused teaching with talking. Teaching and talking aren't the same, are they? The difference is the evidence of learning. So for there to be evidence, we've got to make the expectations clear. We've got to model for our students. We've got to show them what high-quality work looks like, because many of them have never produced it, never seen it. We've got to check for understanding. Make sure they understand what it is they're trying to learn that's expected of them. We have to draw on their interests so we can make it relevant to their lives. Kids are capable of learning anything, if there's a teacher who knows how to be a bridge to the material. We have to give them numerous opportunities to revise and resubmit the work, because you don't do your best work on the first draft. The real learning isn't in the first submission, it's in the revision. And the real teaching isn't in the grading, but in the feedback. How do we help that student get from a D to a B or an A? That's where the teaching comes in. So when we focus on the evidence, when we are willing to take their questions and their feedback, when we're willing to analyze work with our colleagues, how many of you are doing that in your schools now, analyzing student work together? Most powerful professional development I've seen go on in any schools is bringing the work into the room, having teachers analyze it together on a regular basis, because when the work is in the room, the connections between teaching and learning become clear. And if there's a safe environment, teachers can ask questions. How come your kids could write that essay? My kids struggled. What did you do? My kids refused to read the book. How did you get them to take it on? That's how we reduce the isolation of our teachers, and that's how we start to enable our teachers to be a resource for each other. And so I want you to think about what are the practices that you're going to implement to increase engagement. And project-based learning is one of them, but there's lots of other strategies out there that work. And I want to encourage you not to allow PBL to become the new panacea. Say, all right, PBL will solve all the problems. How many of you have heard that about something else? iPads will solve our problems. And it never works, does it? Because it's always more complicated. There's lots of things that work, depending on the student, depending on your school, depending on the teacher. I encourage you to be creative and to talk about this with your colleagues. Technology can be a tool that facilitates learning, but it's not a panacea. Not a panacea, and I get worried. Sometimes I go to so many schools that are fixated on buying the latest technology, but not fixated on getting to know their kids. Do you know your students? Do you know what the challenges they face outside of school? Do you know how they learn? Do you understand their strengths and what motivates them? And how to make the curriculum relevant to their lives? Let me close with this. A few years ago, Roland Fryer, guy on the right, an economist at Harvard, was given a bunch of money to do an experiment. The experiment was, could he motivate kids to achieve by paying them? And they tried the experiment out in several cities, and they paid kids for better attendance, they paid them for better grades, they paid them to read books, they paid them for higher scores. And after 2 years of paying kids, they came away and said, not working. Now, I always had my suspicions about this. Because first of all, I questioned how long would they pay them? Right, and how many kids were they going to pay? So what were they trying to accomplish anyway? But on the same day that the results were announced that this experiment had failed, that was the day that Jaime Escalante died. And some of you may know about Jaime Escalante. He was that crazy Bolivian engineer who taught calculus at Garfield High School in East LA. And when Escalante got to Garfield, he was told by his department chair, you're going to teach remedial math, because that's what we offer here. And after a day or two, he said, this is a waste of time. It's not preparing kids for anything. He said, I want to teach calculus. They said, these kids can't learn calculus. You're teaching kids who are from the poorest neighborhoods in LA. These are gangbangers. These are future waiters and waitresses. That's who you're teaching. He said, yeah, watch me. Not only did he teach calculus, he taught advanced placement calculus. And had kids take the exam, and they passed. So they thought it was something fishy, and they required an investigation, required the kids to be retested, and they passed again and again, 19 years in a row. Go to Garfield, you'll still see the mural up to Escalante. And after a while, the researchers came in, they said, well, we got to figure out what's he doing. How is he getting these kids to pass this AP calculus exam? And they came in from different universities, and they all came back and said the same thing. They said, it's nothing but math in there. Because they didn't understand what he was doing. He called it cultivating ganas in students, the desire to learn. He was challenging their whole frame of reference. He said, you're the descendants of people who built pyramids. Calculus is part of your heritage, not a foreign subject. And then he took them to places where you use calculus, like aeronautical labs. He said, this is why you need this, so you can get jobs like these. I met one of his former students. She is now the only Latina engineer at Boeing in Southern California. Boeing's in trouble, though, so. And on her time, free time, she does robotics in schools, and she works with kids teaching robotics on Saturdays. And I saw her one day at Hawkins High School, and she was there explaining. I said, how come you do this? She said, I do it because of what Escalante did for me. She said, he was there for us. He pushed us. He got us to work hard. He got us to believe in ourselves. She said, he used to come to my soccer games. I said, he came to your games? He said, yeah, but not to cheer me on. He told me I suck at soccer. Go back to math. And I'm so glad he did. Because of that, now I'm an engineer. Well, at that funeral, there was this outpouring of engineers and lawyers and professionals of various kinds, all of whom came from Garfield High School, the same neighborhood. The neighborhood hadn't changed. What changed was that opportunity to learn. I share this because each of us has that opportunity to be a teacher that can motivate, that can inspire, that can use education to change lives. That's what this work is about. Using education to expand opportunity, to open doors, to demonstrate the power of knowledge. You have that power. I hope you'll use it to empower your students. Thank you.